Welcome, everyone. This is the International Peace Coalition. This is the 136th meeting that we've had consecutively. Thank you all who have joined us in being part of this process for 136 weeks. My name is Anastasia Battle. I'll be your moderator today, as well as Dennis Small. And today, I'm sure as many people are aware, we are in a full-out drive toward nuclear war, and we have got to coordinate our activities as best as we can amongst all of our different organizations. And as always, I like to remind people why we created this International Peace Coalition 136 weeks ago, which was to unite the peace movement. Whether you're from the left, the right, whatever philosophy you believe in, religion that you worship, country you're from, or language you speak, if you are for true peace and collaborating with other people to make that happen, then you are welcome here. And please, if you are new, feel free to welcome yourself during the discussion period. Tell us where you're from and any organizations that you're with and initiatives that you may have. To start us off today, we're going to do some things a little bit different just because we have a very special guest on to join us. We have Mr. Dennis Kucinich. And so we're going to just have Helga open just for a little bit and then go to Mr. Kucinich. So Helga, Helga Zepp-LaRouche is the founder of the Schiller Institute and the initiator of the International Peace Coalition. Why don't you go ahead and start us off for just a couple of minutes, Helga, and we'll jump to Dennis.
Hello to all of you. And, just to introduce the topic very briefly, I think the whole world is still in a state of shock after the intervention in Venezuela by U.S. special forces, kidnapping President Maduro and bringing him to the United States into according to sources, extremely terrible jail in New York. This, in a certain sense, came as a shock. Not so much that it's the first time that the United States has occupied other countries, made interventionist wars. I think what shocked the world this time is the absolute blatant character of the whole operation. And, basically also what is following after it makes clear that as of now, international law, as it has developed with the UN Charter and, actually out of the process of the Peace of Westphalia, which was a very important process to establish international law, that phase is over. There is no more international law, and it has been replaced by might makes right and the law of the jungle. That obviously is uncorking and unleashing all kinds of things, ranging to the attempt to possibly annex Greenland in some form, which is now on the agenda. But naturally, there are many other instabilities in the world residing out of it. And, we are determined, and that is the purpose both of the IPC and also a special program we are making this coming Sunday with EIR, that we are trying to organize a resistance against that, to say we have to have international law, or else, the danger is that these tendencies totally develop a dynamic of their own, leading to a potential not very far away global nuclear war. So having introduced that, I want to give the word to Mr. Kucinich.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Kucinich. Mr. Dennis Kucinich is a former U.S. congressman from Ohio, a fantastic one, I might add, and I've been a personal supporter of yours, and also a former U.S. presidential candidate, which the world definitely would have been very different had you been president, Mr. Kucinich. Thank you again so much for joining us. Please go ahead. You have the floor.
Usted tiene la palabra. Gracias, Anastasia. Gracias, Helga.
Speak into Spanish interpreter into Spanish, please, not English.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Anastasia, and thank you, Helga. for your leadership on so many matters relating to international peace. As someone who, as a member of Congress, led the effort against against all wars and conflicts during my 16 years in the U.S. House, and have vigorously defended our United States Constitution and those principles that relate to checks and balances that are being destroyed by the present administration. I can tell you that I have the same sense of urgency that everyone on this call has. We're at an inflection point, whether or not we will stand for peace or watch the world disintegrate around us. And that standing means visibility. There's no question about it. Now, we're at a conjunction of the attack on Venezuela and the murder of Renee Good in Minnesota, which represents an abandonment of our constitutional principles and the an essential cardinal principle of our founding about life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. This woman was a gentle lady. She was just trying to get out of the traffic when she was accosted by ICE. And of course, those of you who have been watching, and I'm sure most people have, all over America, people are coming to the streets in protest of her murder. But there is also this understanding that the administration of the United States has taken a turn towards utter and abject lawlessness, destruction of any international agreements. The fact that February we have a START agreement that ought to be renewed should not escape our attention. We are tiptoeing through the graveyard of history, pretending that a nuclear confrontation cannot happen. The suspension of disbelief that Melville wrote about in Moby Dick is something that we need to pay attention to because it can happen. And it's only our concerted effort and our dedication to a peaceful world and to a just world and to a semblance of a legal order that can help forestall what is beginning to look like an inevitability. So, to each and every one of you, the journey that brought you to this moment, thank you. And I'm in full support of all the efforts to attempt to not just wake up our own government here in the United States and the Congress and make it relevant again as a check and a balance on the misuse of the executive office, but also to help the people feel their own power again, to understand that all government derives from the consent of the governed, and we need to support that principle through our own individual efforts. So thank you very much for giving me a few moments here, Anastasia. As I indicated to you, I really have a hard stop. I have to move along right now, but I'm committed to the same cause that everyone on this call is. And I salute you for your efforts. And today we need to redouble our efforts and resonate with the urgency that we're feeling. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Dennis Kucinich, for joining us and showing your support. I'm sure many people who are on this discussion today look forward to the work that you and others are doing right now in the United States, especially towards these very important goals for true peace in the world. I will make sure to share your Substack in the chat for people to go to. Dennis Kucinich has the Kucinich Report. People should definitely check that out. He put out an excellent article just a couple of days ago on the Venezuela situation and the unconstitutionality of the situation. So thank you again, Mr. Kucinich, for joining us. So I will come back to Helga to fill out the world, and then we'll continue with our discussion today. So thank you again. So I'll come back to Helga Zepp-LaRouche, who, as I said, is the founder of the Schiller Institute and the initiator of the International Peace Coalition. Please go ahead.
Yeah, so following the intervention in Venezuela, President Trump has now announced that he wants to increase the US military budget from 1 trillion, which is already an amazing figure, to 1.5 trillion. That's a 50% increase. And, you know, what supposedly justifies this is that Trump wants to have a dream army defending against all possible foes. Now, many people, including Tucker Carlson, commented on that, saying that, you know, this means we are preparing for war, for a big global war. And indeed, it does not make any other sense. So if you take the US 1.5 trillion military budget, which, by the way, has sent the military industrial firms skyrocketing in their shares. For example, the Saab, I think that's a Swedish firm, they increased 25%, Rheinmetall 20%, and others also going up significantly. That obviously, you know, has to be seen together with the militarization going on in the European Union, Germany wanting to become the strongest army of Europe, which has even caused Putin to make remarks saying that Russia notes the fact and, you know, is prepared to answer any attacks appropriately. And naturally, the militarization going on in Japan, where now, according to various sources, Japan is trying to acquire nuclear weapons, and that has caused the Chinese to make a report very upset about the ongoing efforts by Japan to either have nuclear weapons themselves or participate in US weapons. That's the arrangement which exists with Germany and some other European countries already. So then naturally, the other absolute hair-raising development, which is showing that there is no stop to this, is the fact that both President Trump as well as J.D. Vance have stated repeatedly many times that they want to take Greenland. Now, Greenland has some autonomous status, belongs otherwise to the Kingdom of Denmark. And, you know, according to many statements, the Greenlanders essentially, if they want to have a change in status, want independence and not be part of the United States. So, you know, when the spokeswoman of the White House was asked if military means would be an option, she said, yes, all options are on the table of the president. Then some statements were made, maybe we only will try to buy Greenland. You know, that has been discussed many times before. There has been efforts to calculate how much it would cost to bribe the Greenlanders by paying each individual out. In any case, the argument given is that supposedly Greenland would be a big threat to Russia, to the United States because of Russian and Chinese missiles. Now, this is completely ludicrous. There has been no sign whatsoever that neither Russia nor China would want to do that. So it's just absolutely blatant. Now, even Polish Prime Minister Tusk, who was more or less in the war party of the coalition of the willing before, he now also, like the Prime Minister of Denmark, Mette Frederiksen, said that if this happens, it makes NATO pointless, because if you have, you know, tension or a quarrel or even warlike actions within NATO, NATO will fall apart. So in a joke, I want to say maybe Trump should do some military action if the net result is that NATO will go, but one shouldn't make jokes with such terrible things. Now, that is going on naturally. The other thing which we have to not forget, because the center, according to Russian Defense Ministry statements, they were able to neutralize all of these drones, but the implication of it was incredible, because if that would have been successful and Putin would have been killed, we would not be sitting here anymore. We would be already in an escalation way, way beyond, anything, maybe already lost the spiral of confrontation. Now, Trump initially said that he got a phone call from Putin and that he was very angry about it. Then a little time later, he said no, he reversed his position and said this was all a lie. It did not happen. It was all made up by Putin. In the meantime, the relation between the United States and Russia has clearly worsened because Witkoff and Kushner were at a subsequent meeting of the Coalition of the Willing in Paris, where some kind of a so-called peace agreement or some deal was made where the French and the UK said that they want to establish some kind of military hubs after there is a peace deal. Now that is, again, completely ludicrous because Russia has made many times clear they will not accept European troops after some arrangement in Ukraine because these are NATO troops. And that is why the whole conflict started in the first place. So for these Europeans, especially the British and the French in this case, to repeat that is just, one can only say, a provocation. Also, one has to note that the Russian media coverage about the United States after the attack on Venezuela has clearly shifted. While they had, after the Anchorage meeting, always a very positive coverage about Trump and other developments, now they are shifting back by basically, condemning the intervention in Venezuela and otherwise being very critical. So what we see, and then the big question is, how did this happen? Did Trump know about the drone attack? Was he misbriefed by his own security team, the CIA? Some analysts have mooted that the CIA may have provided the Ukrainians with the information about the location where Putin was supposedly would stay. In any case, the Russian Defense Ministry had, or rather the Russian Defense Ministry had provided the US military attaché in Moscow with the evidence that it was a drone attack, where the drones came from, what the goal was, and who possibly programmed these drones. So there was no response by the West, and that, in my view, we should really understand. If the head of the strongest nuclear power on the planet would have been killed in a decapitation strike, we would be at a point of no return. So that has to be kept in mind, that we are, experiencing a clearly worsening environment all around. Now, so the European Union is considering some reactions. They haven't said yet what, into the Greenland threat. And Steinmeier, who is one of the people who want to have the strongest army of Europe in Germany, but even he seems to be shocked because at a birthday meeting, or an event which was organized at the occasion of his 70th birthday by the Körber Foundation, Steinmeier said that he is quite upset about a double epochal break. The first one would have been the military attack by Russia on Ukraine, but the second one would have been what happened with Venezuela. So he puts that on the same footing, and he said, this is now an effort to push the small and medium countries to the side, and we are threatened with a situation where the those who have the least scruples are trying to turn the world into a robber den, where everybody can attack the other one. So as you can see, the situation is getting really extremely tense. And what Mr. Kucinich mentioned, the ICE killing of this 37-year-old woman, Renee Nicole Good, a mother of three, who was clearly trying to drive her car away from these ICE agents. That is clear from video coverage. She was shot by one of these agents into the face, just into the head like that, which is already horrible enough. But even more horrible is the fact that both President Trump and J.D. Vance clearly took the side of these ICE agents. J.D. Vance said this is a tragedy of her own making. And naturally, this was in Minneapolis, where a couple of years ago, George Floyd was killed. And, there is already signs that the American population is taking to the streets like they did a couple of years ago. So I think that, the situation is extremely serious. We have to make a real effort to mobilize any possible force for peace and for the return of legality and legitimacy of politics, return to international law. And I can only say, the Pope, who is an American Pope, clearly contradicts what President Trump is doing. He came out defending the sovereignty of Venezuela, and he demanded that the migrants must be treated according to their humanity and dignity, disapproving very, very clearly with the policy against the migrants of the Trump administration. Now, the only tiny element of positive news I can add, is the fact that in the European Union, free speech, freedom of press, freedom of opinion is being suppressed in ways which are really approaching a dictatorship, which was most clearly expressed in the sanctions against the Swiss former military colonel Jacques Beau, who got sanctioned and completely deprived of anything. His accounts, his freedom of travel, he cannot even buy food anymore, nor can people buy food for him. So that complete outrageous development, which many people understood, is not only targeting Colonel Beau, but it is meant to cause fear and terror in everybody who dares to express an opinion which is not in cohesion with the NATO narrative, which is really a threat to the most fundamental rights of the citizens of all the world, especially Europe. Now, the positive news about that is that there is an unprecedented reaction. Many people are expressing their solidarity with Jacques Beau, and one can only hope that the same happens in respect to all of these other things I mentioned, and that there will be indeed that the actions against Venezuela, while it was for sure not the first one, but the blatancy with which it was just justified, will cause the whole world to assemble and demand that we must return not only to international law, but that we must give ourselves a system of governance which allows for the human species to survive. And that is why we are calling for the urgency to establish a new security and development architecture, which this time, for sure, must take into account the interest of every single country on the planet, or else it will not work. So that is what we will direct our efforts on, and that is what I wanted to say in the beginning.
Great. Thank you very much, Helga. And as always, thank you for situating the meeting for us going into today, because there's so many things happening, and it's important that we have a clear perspective of what's actually happening in the world. So we shall continue with our agenda. Next, I'd like to bring in Professor Falk, who is a professor emeritus of international law and practice at Princeton University. He's also the former United Nations Human Rights Rapporteur in Palestine and the occupied territories. He's a member of the editorial board of The Nation, which he's published many very important articles, and he's the president of the Gaza Tribunal, which we've had you on here to discuss the very important initiatives that you have been working on. So thank you so much for joining us, Professor Falk, for this really tense moment in history. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much for those gracious words. And I share the views that Helga just summarized and Dennis Kucinich brought to our attention, that we're at a very critical moment in international society, and the future of the human species is really brought into question by the irresponsible kind of politics that has characterized the Trump era of U.S. foreign policy, and, as was noted, the correlation with internal repressive governance within the United States. I do want to suggest that the problem posed by the outrageous intervention in Venezuela is part of the failure of the framework established after World War II in 1945. That framework allowed the winners of World War II to have a privileged position in relation to the UN Charter and to international law more generally, because it conferred a veto, a right of veto, that was not conditional on compliance with the Charter, that was given to these 5 winning countries, and they had no restriction on the use of the veto. So what, if in effect, was done at great risk, in my view, was to confer the responsibility and authority for the management of global security on these geopolitical actors. And it meant that geopolitics was given a position of authority in relation to international law when it came to the management of global security. We should remember that international law covers the whole range of interactions among sovereign states, and it functions reasonably well in most areas like air and maritime safety, diplomatic immunity for ambassadors, sovereign immunity. All these areas have worked rather well. It's in this vital field of war prevention, genocide convention, that the failures of geopolitics, rather than the failure of international law, was woven into this framework that was evolved after World War II, that was designed to be a hybrid framework, one rule of law for the losers and for the vast number of states that became members of the UN, and another kind of status for the five winners. And it's that is the real crisis, is this geopolitical primacy that was woven into the normative order. And it was not just in the Charter, it was also in relation to accountability for violating international law. The Nuremberg and Tokyo trials only held the losers accountable for their violations of international law. The crimes of the winners were not investigated and certainly not prosecuted. So one had this sense of political realism that exempted from international law the behavior of the most powerful states. And this is something that has been suppressed as a matter of state propaganda in the West, as if its liberal values that were championed governed its pursuit of its strategic interests. And the Trump presidency from the earlier term was seeking a kind of geopolitical accommodation to govern the world. China, Russia, and the U.S. That was the original Trump vision that has been challenged from within and without and misunderstood. And it was not a law-governed vision at all. It was a geopolitically dominated vision. But what has created the crisis is this era of irresponsible and imprudent geopolitics. That's what's caused this danger that I'm so grateful to the International Peace Coalition for trying to alert the world and civil society and the peoples of the world that they are facing a apocalyptic threat unless they mobilize for peace and justice. And in that sense, we're faced with this terrible reminder of how the world is working by both the attack on Putin's residence and the Venezuelan intervention, both totally irresponsible geopolitics. And as well, if looked at abstractly, violations of international law. But as I've been trying to stress, those were designed to be immune from control. These five states, one relied on their self-restraint, not on international law, not on even elemental international morality. And if we want a world order that does promote peace and justice, there are two paths to that. One is the internal transformation of the foreign policies of these five countries, particularly the U.S., which means the demilitarization of foreign policy, and this would require some radical reforms in relation to private sector military influence on how the government perceives security and its own interests. As matters now stand, it's a political realism that is attached to a might makes right vision of how world order should be managed. And so I believe the debate that we need has to go beyond the condemnation of violating international law, because what international law has never been the constraint that was respected by particularly the U.S. The Vietnam War was a reminder of the degree to which intervention, aggressive uses of force, and this was reinforced in recent years by the support of Israel's genocide in Gaza. So my conclusion is that we are at a global crisis point. We need to analyze it correctly, and we need to mobilize opposition to the current geopolitical trends. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Falk. I agree with you, and I think many people on this discussion are feeling that very strong desire to mobilize as quickly as possible. So we should definitely set up more discussions, I think, of activities and things, and checking in with people and things that they're doing around the world. Just want to send that call out to people who are on the discussion right now to definitely put in your reports today on activities that you've been doing. I do want to jump over to Helga. I know you wanted to say something quickly. Please go ahead. Oh, you're muted, my friend.
Okay. Yeah, Professor Falk, I thank you very much for your presentation, because you shed some new angle on a problem which I have been addressing for a long time. For years, I have been saying that we have to overcome geopolitics, because geopolitics is the cause of 2 world wars in the 20th century. And if we don't overcome it, we are at great risk to go into a third one, which would be the final one. But I think what you said about the flaws of the framework in the UN Security Council structure, I mean, I also knew that, but I think that you attribute geopolitics exactly to that body makes complete sense. And I think that gives more nourishment to the efforts to really go for a reform, giving the countries of the global south a much more appropriate voice according to their size. So I think that is definitely very, very important. And I would really like to, again, even if I have said it many times, I really think we need absolutely urgently to discuss why we need a new security and development architecture, which, in the tradition of the Peace of Westphalia, must agree on principles which take care of addressing the interest of every single country on the planet, or it does not work. because if you have a so-called peace treaty where you do not pay attention to everybody, like in the Versailles Treaty, the Versailles Treaty was not a peace treaty, it was just a stepping stone to the Second World War. And I think if we have learned any lesson from that sequence, then we have to come up with a solution which takes into account everybody. I forgot to mention earlier that naturally the Russians in the meantime have responded to the attack on the residency of President Putin in Volgograd by deploying yesterday several Oreshnik systems together with some other long-range missiles and drones, attacking the drone factories in Ukraine and the energy supply, making these drone factories function. So this clearly is a message, and I think if the West is not waking up, the Oreshnik missile, which has not been nuclear armed but only conventional, however, which has a kinetic power approaching the destructive potential of a nuclear missile, and there is no defense against it, which is why the Oreshnik could hit every single target in all of Europe. And I think that if that message is not understood and the policy corrected, we are in the danger of an escalation of potentially absolutely fatal conditions. But I just wanted to really reiterate this need that can we not initiate on an international level a discussion either among countries, I mean nations, for example, if the Global South nations, the non-aligned movement, the group of the Friends of the UN Charter, and similar bodies would just convene an international conference and say that in response to what has happened in the last several days, that there must be a new approach to establish a new security architecture. Because I think if such an initiative is not taken, things will just continue to spiral out of control.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. I'll make sure to include the link to your 10 principles for a new security and development architecture in the chat. I'll pull it up momentarily. But thank you so much, Professor Falk, for your contribution. And we will definitely come back for more discussion. We're already getting questions coming in for you and others. So next, I'd like to go to retired Colonel Alain Corvez from France. He's an international consultant, former advisor to the French Defense and Interior Ministries. Thank you so much for joining us, Colonel Corvez. Bonjour. Please, you have the floor. Oh, you're muted, Colonel Corvez. One moment.
Donc, voilà, c'est bon. Bon. J'ai apprécié les exposés qui ont été faits.
I appreciated these presentations that were just made. I would like to say that the United Nations have a charter, and this charter is made to be respected. There are certain states, such as Israel, the United States, that do not respect the charter. So we don't need to change the rules. If the rules had been applied strictly by all of the states, especially by the United States and Israel, the world would certainly be in a better state today. 2 days ago, in the Oval Office, President Trump received about 10 journalists, including the New York Times. They asked some questions, I'm not going to repeat everything he said, but one thing he said is that no international rule will prevent him from doing what he wants to do. Secondly, his second rule, what's going to stop him? He said, Trump said nothing. The only thing that can stop me is my own mind. So President Trump says that the United Nations Charter and this is finished. The rule of President Trump, which becomes the international rule. This is the proof that we're no longer in a world which is rational and directed. I was in Iran. I came back 2 days ago, where I spent about 10 days, and I would just like to express my reflections on this subject, because there's an important analogy with Venezuela. I saw in Iran, a little bit everywhere, the unabashed lies of the international media. It is incredible to what extent they will go to propagate lies. The revolution of Khamenei is supposed to be taken into Moscow, that there would be protests everywhere. Now, I went through Tehran on foot and by car. I didn't see any protests. Maybe there were some. I'm not saying there weren't, but I didn't see them. I went through the streets from the east to the west, from the north to the south. Secondly, they said that the revolution was going to Moscow. And when I heard that information, I had gone three hours before. I had passed in front of the Supreme Guide's residence, and there was just a sentinel. There was no protection from Moscow. There were no tanks. There were no armored cars, nothing. Moreover, in Tehran, I saw a population that was debonair, smiling, in symbiosis with the population, and who was not afraid of anything. So when there was police interventions, it was by commandos, and it was recognized officially that they were giving arms to the demonstrators. And that was again another lie, because I know that the French television, for example, it's probably the same elsewhere in Europe, they repeated lies permanently concerning the situation in Iran. What I think is that one thing very important happened while I was in Tehran. On the 1st of January, one of the leaders made a speech honoring General Soleimani. I was present for his speech. I knew him well. I can talk more about that later, but anyway, he said he was elected, this person was elected on a moderate platform, who was the president. And on the 1st of January 2026, the president said, he said that there would be a restructured resistance to imperialism, which went beyond the differences between nations. He had went beyond the difference in religions between Shiites and Sunnis, for example. And it was also Soleimani who had, in a post-mortem, it was said, but he was he was one of the originators of this peace agreement that was later signed between Iran and Saudi Arabia in Beijing. So in Iran, I also saw demonstrators supporting the government because those demonstrating for reasons, reasonable and legitimate reasons in Tehran, you can imagine, since the country has been under sanction for 45 years, there's a lot of difficulty there, hardship. But there have been measures taken not to tax fundamental projects, basic projects, or medicine. For example, with €1, you can fill your car with gas. In Europe, you'll see how much gas you can get for €1. It's true that life is very difficult for the Iranians, but given the overall situation and the permanent pressure that's exerted on Iran, and of course there are problems with corruption that have to be remedied, of course. But most Iranians know, they are perfectly aware of the fact that there are these problems that have to be solved. But we have to understand that Iran, toward Israel and the United States, Iran has a dissuasion it can exert because of its missiles. If Trump had not intervened some time ago, Israel would have again attacked Iran. And so, therefore, the deterrence, rather, is essential. Whatever deterrence these Iranians can exert. When they say Iran is going to be attacked by Israel, and I said, I don't think so, because they can be, the counterattack could be very strong. They had seen the result in June of 25. But they have put, the United States have rather emphasized color revolutions or such techniques to try and transform the demonstrations, legitimate demonstrations by Iranians into a kind of anti-government demonstrations. But this will not happen because the declarations of Trump or of Netanyahu about these social movements in Iran, the Iranians have understood that behind all of that, there is a color revolution process going on. So these declarations were counterproductive. So I don't think they'll succeed. But to come back to deterrence that Iran can exert, I think that if Israel makes the mistake of striking Iran militarily, this would develop, just as it did in last June, a unity of the people behind its government. Therefore, I don't think it will be done directly as an attack. I'm talking about that because what happened in Venezuela is also similar to what happens in Iran. The two countries are allies, and the Venezuelan people has understood also that the fate of the Iranian people are the same as its own fate. And the government, of course, of the both countries are in permanent contact, or were in contact. And China also supports discreetly, but nevertheless, Iran and Venezuela is rest, because China cannot accept that one or the other be subjected to the rule of the United States. So this way of cooperating between Iran and Venezuela, I think, was very important. I could say much more about this, but I don't want to take too much of your time. But first of all, I think the Chart of the United Nations, with its conditions, but it has been destroyed, ripped up by President Trump, among others. Trump is not about to respect any law, international law. And when a president says that so openly, and I don't think he's crazy, and when you see what happens in Israel, you can see that there's a connivance in their way of conceiving of international rules and laws. I don't want to go on too long about this, but I'll stop here. But it's important to understand that there are no international rules that are respected under Donald Trump. And the countries that are being attacked are drawing closer together. And the president of Iran, when he was giving this homage to Soleimani, said that the strategy adopted by Soleimani was supported by all of the countries of the Middle East and even wider, and that this strategy was the only strategy valid today. This is a very important thought that he put forward concerning the concept of defense that the Iranian government has. They don't want to discuss with insane people like Netanyahu or Trump. So the president said that the strategy of resistance designed by Soleimani would remain valid in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel Corvez. I think that is an important point going back to the last presidency. I think this is useful for the discussion. Thank you very much for your insights, and we'll definitely come back for more discussion with the panel and the audience as well. Next, I'd like to bring in Professor Fernando Corzon from Ecuador. He's the Director of Solidarity with Palestine and former consultant on defense policy strategies, as well as, and I apologize for not remembering to add this in there, but Fernando also consultant on defense policy strategies.
Et également un consultant dans la stratégie.
You're in the wrong channel.
Sí. Gracias. Saludos a todos.
Thank you very much. Greetings to all. I think what's been said is really interesting, what Colonel Corvez just said in particular, because this allows for the framework of the brief remarks I'd like to make. In fact, when he talks about Iran and Soleimani, this is a very important aspect. On January 3rd was the assassination of Soleimani, based on a procedure which in that year was like the antecedent to what we're living through today. That attack on leaders, presidents, of the sort that we've seen today in the case of Maduro. That reference, which he also makes to the very real situations which occur, and how the images that are presented internationally completely misrepresent what is going on. I've also watched what's been going on in Iran. I know of Tehran. I visited there. It was a developing, beautiful city. Now, just recently, we've seen the same occur in Venezuela, that they are the situation of Maduro's presidency. There were reports of confrontations with civilians in his previous administration, and I was able to visit Venezuela as well. And in fact, Caracas was peaceful, completely peaceful. It was generalized development. The population was calm. There was no crime. And I would assume the same is going on today. With regard to the rest, I would like to make a few comments with regard to comments which I think are decisive on policies related to a number of factors which make the decision-making process of the great deciders worldwide. This is associated principally with the design of models that are themselves designed based on the famous algorithms, but which also allow for the establishment, the perspectives of what can occur in the future. I've taught about this. I've presented these overviews of these models, these strategic models. And so I just want to talk about two because I don't think we can cover all. But this idea of the military operational model, I want to specify what this means. This means to explain a bit what's happened in Venezuela and how this projects forward in the coming years. We can say there is a kind of operational tactic with advanced technology, which has been increasing and has been renewing itself. In fact, with these kinds of actions, which we've seen elsewhere, such as in the case of Gaza. In fact, it's said that in Gaza, it was a population theory, a populational approach, which was the precedent for what was applied in Caracas and other states of Venezuela, because it wasn't only Caracas which was it. I want to specify this because the technology that has been used includes one crucial point, and that is in artificial intelligence. This is not a new subject today. We saw this in the case of Gaza, but now this dynamic of the use of artificial intelligence and the use of also airspace capabilities, which have been generated based on some of the individuals that have done this, such as the case of Palantir, of Teal, also Starling, with regard to the role that this famous scientist plays, this capitalist involved in many of the processes in the United States. So this by way of a first reference, because there were also actions in places where this idea of artificial intelligence was applied. The other element, which I think is really very important to reiterate at this point, to locate what's happened in Venezuela, is the deployment of sea platforms, military sea platforms, maritime platforms. This is not only something that has happened today, but this also happened when we saw the attack on Iran, the attack on the nuclear centers, the maritime platforms in the Mediterranean and elsewhere that were utilized. And this was quite clear, not just like we see today. This was not just to control or supervise or even act, but rather to get real-time information. Because now access to global information about individuals, about vehicles, about facts, this generates patterns of conduct and behavior. And this allows you to project through what is known as simulations and to model for military operations. That determines that the decisions that are being made are being taken real time in the operations, as I believe happened, or I think happened in the case of Caracas. This wasn't just calculated coldly beforehand. This was a process of real-time knowledge at the time to be able to decide specific actions as developments unfolded, in this case with regard to their enemies, the Venezuelan people. And so we're talking about the question of artificial intelligence, but not only that, but technology related to that has to do with this attack. I would call this almost a satanic attack. I also want to emphasize something which hasn't been mentioned yet, and that is that the action taken against Venezuela was not something exclusively related to the United States Army or armed forces, because we're aware that in the Caribbean, many of the islands in the Caribbean are colonies of Great Britain, of France, and of other countries. In the case of France, they have military bases, very advanced ones. It's impossible that this type of action could have been carried out with so many dimensions to it without a coordination with others, or at least to make sure that there would be deconfliction. So there is a real coordination, and this is now beginning to be mentioned. And here, there's an element, and I want to emphasize that the model of military intervention in Gaza was a kind of experimentation which is now being applied in Venezuela. Furthermore, and there are analysts who have very delicate information involved. In fact, there are some who say that this was designed jointly with Israel. This gives us the idea that the kind of projection which is being carried out for the coming years is this development of military forces of various countries, especially the ones that are intervening in this kind of way against governments and nations. This allows us to locate the real dimensions and the military political risks of what I would call a kind of, let's call it, this is an operational tactic with artificial intelligence applied by the United States and with other partners in Venezuela. Obviously, this has been quite effective. We have to recognize that fact. On the other hand, there's uncertainty on the strategic level internationally because of this agreement which has to be maintained or has to be renewed in February over arms control, the New START agreement. It's not clear at this point whether there will be a continuation of this policy or not. Yeah. If this isn't done, then there's a very high risk that these kinds of confrontations could lead up to, in fact, even a nuclear conflict. We don't want that to happen, but that could actually occur. So there is no tactical military equilibrium, and there is enormous uncertainty on the world strategic equilibrium. And this is the conclusion that I would draw to from the first model. The second model is closely related. That is the models of management governance. Who are the ones who designed the Abraham Accords in the first Trump administration, which never was fulfilled? There was opposition from the Arab nations, who determined, in part, the agreements which were agreed upon in the 21 points, or then reduced to 20 points in the Gaza case. Who are the ones who are involved there? And there we have Kushner. And who are the ones who are now negotiating with Russia on a peace agreement? Who are the ones who are carrying this out? Once again, we have the same individuals. So this is not a coincidence. This is a model. This is a strategy, a political, financial, military strategy, which is defining the fate of the world, where the interests go way beyond the mere presence of global governance of the United Nations, even human characteristics, given the relationships which exist between these countries. So there's a high risk to the very values themselves which have shaped the world. And this is like a satanic direction that the world is going in. And in Venezuela, this also begins to be evident. This is a strategy. When we see how these models are being executed, all associated with investments, there's a confirmed fact, which is that a month before the kidnapping of Maduro, the oil companies, as was mentioned here as well, those oil companies had already begun to negotiate and knew what was going to occur. Obviously, other companies associated with this network, tied to these hegemonic groups of power around Trump and so on, because this also allowed for some of these companies to be purchased before the attack has occurred. And these are the ones whose stock valuations have skyrocketed and the possibilities of new contracts. So what we're looking at, just as with Trump's proposal for Gaza, which had been negotiated beforehand, the new Gaza Riviera, that concept we have to keep in mind to tie the military question with the business conception which these same sectors are carrying out. This is extremely dangerous for all of humanity. And so what we have with these personalities is the Kirchners, the Witkoffs, the mayor, the Millers, who say horrible things and state openly that force is the only option. We're not talking about international order. It's not standards and norms, none of that. So in that regard, there's a method which they are trying to apply, or method being applied in Venezuela, blackmail, imposition, and even perhaps reaching an agreement with them based on possible contracts for purchase of Venezuelan oil by the United States. So this happens in the context of a very real confrontation. So then this enters into other modalities where the violent military actions are associated to blackmail or impose. And here we have the new role that Donald Trump has taken up. Look, it's no coincidence. Donald Trump, in the case of the agreements on Gaza, proposed that the person who is going to carry out the peace council would be he. And now we're talking openly, and they've said it, that the alternative for Ukraine, there also has to be some sort of a peace council. Who would preside over that? Trump. That's being stated in the media. And what's being stated is that the person who's going to be carrying out the Venezuela situation will again be Trump. So this is the same concept of intervention associated with business, the military side of it. And all of these sectors are winning out. And so there is, however, a counterweight to all of this, which provides some optimism, because there is an extremely important counterweight to this, which is that of the BRICS, China, Russia itself. The democratic countries of the world are generating a strategic counterweight, not only in their statements, but they're doing it as well in terms of the markets. We've seen this from the recent decisions, the market decisions, which China is making. This is another way of carrying out not war or military violence, but yeah, perhaps it's a war of one kind, but it's a way of being a countervailing force of the attitude of this, to try to return to a civilized approach for humanity. So we have, in that sense, strategically, there is an important counterweight. And if I see, if I've gone over my time, please let me know. Please let me know if I wanted to very quickly.
And then, yeah, just take one more minute. We will come back. Absolutely.
Un minuto. So just a general statement then. There is a strategic weakness in communications. We are losing on the cognitive communicational front. So just to state this, there's a fight over communicational control, and there's Netflix, there's Broadway, there's Paramount. There's a fight over who is going to control the communicational world, not only today, but the future. That's grave. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Carson. And I definitely think the points that you're making on this are strategically important for people to understand. I want to bring in one last item for the discussion before we have discussion amongst the panel. That we just did an interview with Diego Sequeira from Venezuela. He's a Venezuelan researcher. When it was interviewed, it was live from the Caracas, Crocus. And we have a small clip from this interview that we wanted to show. It's just a couple of minutes. Can we pull that up, please?
We also know that the U.S. is suffering. We also know that the U.S. are victims of the current situation. We also know that the U.S. are fed up, most of it, in different denominations and manifestations of the endless war, of the dispossession, sustained dispossession throughout time of wealth and horizon and a future. And they are, in many ways, even suffering tougher malaise that, for example, we do on a spiritual and cultural level, I might say.
Mm-hmm.
Because who's the one, according to what Trump has been stating, who's going to subsidize the recovery of the Venezuelan oil industry, according to them? It's not going to be Exxon. It's going to be tax money. It's going to be the citizen one more time. It's going to be part of the process of expoliation, of dispossession of wealth, transfer of wealth bottom up to the new cloud robber barons that are actually the ones that are also controlling and surveilling them and making the toughest efforts to censor them in order to don't get threats from different views and opinions that can mobilize the population.
Good evening, good afternoon. This is EIR News Live interviews for January 8th. My name is Dennis Small. I'm the Ibero-American editor for EIR News. And with me today, we'll be having a discussion with Diego Sequeira. He is a researcher and a columnist for Misión Verdad, or Truth Mission, which is a Venezuelan publication. And Diego is in Caracas. He is speaking to us live from inside Venezuela. And Diego, maybe unlike what other interviews have been like, I don't want to start with the on-the-ground picture in Venezuela, which I know you have and we want to get to. I would like to start with your view from Venezuela of the international response to the return to gunboat diplomacy that has occurred in the case of Venezuela.
Great, thank you. You can check out the full interview here. I'll post the link in the chat, or you can go to Executive Intelligence Review on YouTube and find the channel there and watch the full interview, which we've had other very wonderful interviews, including with Professor Falk and others on that channel as well. So thank you very much for sharing that clip with us. People should definitely check it out. So I'd like to come back to the panel, go to Helga, see if there's any reflections, and the rest of the panel as well on any thoughts people have so far.
Yes, I would like to emphasize what Mr. Garçon had said in terms of the AI models being increasingly a factor in this kind of warfare, which I think is indeed a very terrible idea. You know, if you think that the killing will be, automatized by AI in the way we have seen it in Gaza, and if it was the model for Venezuela, it's even more hair-raising that should be applied. And I think in the case of the June attacks on Iran, it was the Palantir software which was used supposedly where the progress of the Iranian nuclear program was calculated on the basis of such a Palantir model. And that was used by the International Atomic Energy Agency to then basically put out statements, which then created a press environment for the attack by the US and then Israel. 5 days later, the International Atomic Energy Agency said, oh, sorry, this was a mistake. This was not the real nuclear program of Iran. This was just a model, and we made some errors. But then naturally it was too late. So that shows you how dangerous these things are once you automatize these processes. And I think it makes it all the more urgent to think about, how we can get back to a system where also AI and the use of AI in military affairs would be part of a new disarmament and arms control agreement. Concerning the running out of New START, by the way, I should have also mentioned the threatened and as of now happening deployment of US medium-range missiles in Germany anytime in 26, which will make Germany a prime target for any kind of escalation. So we are this will also happen in 26, not in February, I don't know, but it could happen any moment. So I think we are in a very short timetable to change the environment, or else this is going completely out of control.
Thank you, Helga. Professor Falk or Colonel Corvez or Professor Cozon, any thoughts or reflections on the discussion so far? I also see President Ramatar has raised his hand as well. Maybe we'll go to President Ramatar.
I just want to.
Could you turn on your camera, please, President Ramatar?
I'm trying to, but I think you have to turn it on from there. You turn it off, I believe. Let me see.
Should be able to do it now. There we
go. I just want to take a look from a slightly different angle. I think what we're seeing happening internationally, which we've talked about quite a bit, I think we have to look at the dangers that it's causing inside the United States itself. We are speaking about the destruction of international laws, and which we are seeing happening in front of our eyes, and the destruction of international institutions. But we are also seeing that is actually beginning within the United States itself, where the Congress is becoming more and more like a rubber stamp, and the Senate, the same thing is happening in the Senate. I mean, I know that there's some resistance taking place, and hopefully that they will succeed. But it is very, very clear that the present administration of the United States is also trying to destroy the institution within the United States itself, because that is important for them to continue to destroy the international institutions that exist. And we are also seeing these things, it's creeping up on us. We're seeing they're using their military inside the United States in the various states, which was unprecedented. This has never been happening before, where the government of the administration is applying their military inside the states on the pretext of illegal immigrants and so forth. But this is leading to a very, very dangerous situation. Why it's so important is because the US is the most powerful country in the world, and this destruction of laws that is happening in the United States is also, as I said, contributing to what is happening internationally. And the more frequent, only yesterday you had the shooting of this woman who was trying to drive away from the ICE group, and she was shot. It just gives you a tendency of what is taking place, which is, I believe, is very, very dangerous. So while we are fighting for international, and we have to continue to fight for that, the erosion, I think the basis of that is also to fight within the United States to prevent these tendencies from getting out of hand, because I think that is contributing to the deterioration in the international situation. That's what my comment at the moment.
Thank you, President Ramatar. If people are unaware, President Donald Ramatar is the former president of Guyana. Thank you for joining us today. Dennis Small, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, I think what President Ramatar is spot on. The last 10 days that shook the world, have seen a phase change. That means the old way of things working is not working the same anymore at all, from top to bottom in the entire world. And whether some people in the United States know it or not, the United States is actually part of the world. I don't think it's located on a different planet. The phase changes include three major developments, each of somewhat different significance, but together, look at the totality of this picture. First, December 29th, the drone attack on the president of Russia that Helga just referred to. And now we have the response from the Russian side, or the first of a response, with the firing of the Oreshnik missiles, blowing up the largest gas depot in all of Europe, in Lvov in Ukraine, close to Western Europe, not close to the East. This is a message. Secondly, just a few days later was this operation in Venezuela with the attack on January 3rd, the kidnapping and everything surrounding that, the threat of more in the same in Venezuela and in other countries by name. Mexico, Cuba, Nicaragua, Colombia, Iran. Nobody is off the list. And then third, and I would include this in the same general framework of strategic developments, is this cold-blooded assassination of Rene Good. I've seen reports that, well, the individual person involved had PTSD, he'd had earlier incidents and so on. That may be true or maybe not. He shouldn't have been there if that was the case. But the fact of the matter is that the United States government, from the president on down, Noam, J.D. Vance, President Trump, have come out in full support of what occurred there, the cold-blooded assassination, and the videos speak for themselves. So this is all designed to send a message. I would put that together also with the terror tactics deployed against Jacques Beau in Europe for anyone raising their voice. What we're entered into is what one might call the era of shock and awe, the idea that you can, through pure terror, change the way the world functions. And this idea of some kind of Ozymandias or Superman deciding it's going to be the way I say because I say it's going to be that way, fails to take into account that nations have history, nations have ideas, there is a physical economy underlining all of this, and it doesn't simply work to order and to have it happen. In military doctrine, it's another whole discussion on this idea of decapitation strikes. The people who ordered that were the ones who came up with the idea of shock and awe against Iraq, and that wasn't exactly very successful. So I think that's the kind of global picture we're looking at. I would just add one additional point, which is in addition to what Fernando Garzón said about Gaza as a precedent, Gaza is a precedent in another way. The actual underlying policy, in my view, being applied to Venezuela, Cuba, Mexico, and so on, is to turn them into Gaza West. And I would say Iran as well, to use shock and awe in financial warfare, economic warfare, to completely surround, strangle, and depopulate an entire nation. That's what's being done. The oil question is secondary. Come back to that later. But that's what's at issue here. This is the cutoff of oil from Venezuela to China is not going to harm China. China gets a very small percentage of its oil from Venezuela. Venezuela is under a death threat, and so is Cuba, because most of Cuba's oil comes from Venezuela. So we have a situation where the Gaza approach of complete strangulation, of beast man policies is being implemented because of geopolitics in a context of a breakdown of the global financial system. And I think that what President Ramotar said about the internal developments in the United States have to be taken with utter seriousness by those of us who are Americans and those of us who are organizing in the United States. I think it's absolutely the case.
If you allow me another quick comment.
Please go ahead.
I think it has also another kind of implication that we have to look at. What is very clear is that who's in power in the United States? It's fundamentally the military-industrial complex and the oil barons. And therefore, we now understand fully well the attitude of the new administration in the United States towards climate change. That the logic of these people is that they have to make money from oil, and nothing would replace oil. They don't want anything to replace oil because that is where they're making a lot of money. And with these perpetual wars, it makes money for the big industrial complex and allows America to remain the most powerful military force in the world, to dominate the world. And I just want to make that point because I think it is the struggle against climate change is totally being sabotaged by what is taking place now in the United States.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think that this is a perfect time to bring in Diane Sayre, who recently just has a very important meeting that she will be holding this Saturday, and a very important announcement. Why don't you go ahead, Diane?
Well, thank you very much. As people may know, in response to the Venezuela attack, I announced a bit earlier than I had planned that I am putting myself forward as a candidate for President of the United States of America. This is particularly urgently needed right now because we have a situation where one wonders if there is any bottom to the risks that are being taken by our current administration. And I have to say, the previous administration was not particularly better and may have been worse. That is the bind that the American people are in. I just want to reiterate one thing which Helga already has stressed, but I would ask people to consider this, which is the 91 drone attack on Russia, and the fact that the CIA was probably involved in it. I heard Colonel McGregor say on an interview that the CIA had admitted in some form that they had something to do with this. You realize what that means is that the government of the United States was involved in attempting to eliminate the ability of the other major nuclear superpower to respond in the event of a nuclear strike. This is extremely serious, and what's worse, or what compounds this, is that the Russians presented to the U.S. military attaché in Moscow the evidence that they have from the guidance module of the drones, indicating that, presumably, I didn't analyze this, but that the drones were indeed headed to Putin's residence, and also indicating who would have provided such guidance, namely the CIA. That means the United States knows that Russia knows. In the face of that evidence, did Donald Trump fire anyone? No. He doubled down and said it didn't happen, and proceeded to launch the Venezuela operation and proceeded to seize an empty Russian tanker. So I believe that this puts us in an extremely perilous situation. That is why Russia had to respond with the Orezhnik missiles. And I think that certainly most Americans are not considering this at all, but it is the reality in which we are operating. And it means, therefore, that it is incumbent upon the people, the American people and the people of the world, to draw the line which seems to not exist in the institutions of the government of the United States and of NATO right now. They seem to be in a reckless flight forward, incapable of comprehending the potential consequences of their actions. And therefore, it is us, it is this group gathered here with Helga Zepp-LaRouche's international leadership that is going to have to make this very clear and very quickly. And that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you very much, Diane. And I included your announcement and your statement that you had on Venezuela in the chat. People can definitely check that out. If you are able to make it to attend, I think this isn't, in my view, this isn't just you having some presidential announcement, for yourself personally. We have to make some huge political intervention into the United States right now, and use of whatever means that we can make. We need to do that immediately. So thank you for taking that on and playing this role and intervening right now. I know that Dennis Small also has an announcement.
Yeah, just a quick announcement. In addition to what will be the very important discussion at Diane's event tomorrow, which I would recommend that everyone interested in these matters attend, On Monday, there will be, as Helga had mentioned at the outset, an EIR emergency roundtable discussion. This will be Monday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. The headline is, "It's Worse Than You Think, the Strategic Implications of the Attack on Venezuela and How to Bring the World Back from the Brink." And let me emphasize that last part, how to bring the world back from the brink. This will include very distinguished individuals from around the world. This is just a partial list. In addition to Helga, who will keynote it, we have Professor Zhang Weiwei of China, Professor of International Relations at Fudan University. We will have Ambassador Chaz Freeman of the United States, former Assistant Secretary of Defense and a China scholar. We will have His Excellency President Donald Ramotar, who is with us today, the former president of Guyana. We will have former Mexican Congresswoman Maria de los Angeles Huerta. We will have H.C. von Sponeck of Germany, who is a former UN Assistant Secretary General. I will be making some remarks as well, and we will have other prominent speakers. This will be an extremely important discussion to make sure that globally the kind of shift into a new security and development architecture actually occurs, and to get the kind of discussion underway that Helga mentioned. So we'll also put a link for that in the queue. I think it's very important that people attend and participate in that.
Great. Thank you, Dennis. Yeah, I did include that link in the chat, but if you're on over live broadcast, wherever this is being broadcast, you can go to the Executive Intelligence Review YouTube channel and find the invitation and list of speakers there. So, and with that, I think we'll make the transition to the general discussion with the audience. So I'll just make this announcement to everyone who's watching over YouTube, Rumble, Twitter, X, wherever you're watching this from. If you would like to participate in the dialogue process with Professor Falk, Colonel Corvez, Helga Zepp-LaRouche, Professor Garzon, you must be registered and get the Zoom link. You can do that by going into the YouTube description and registering on the IPC registration page there, or you can go to schillerinstitute.com, and right on the top of the website is the registration page. Just sign up and you will be emailed the Zoom link to join live. And with that, Dave, please let me know when we've switched over.